As always, I want to welcome you very much to the 18th episode of Stefan Frank's Photobook show. For those of you who are new in this series, Stefan looks at recent and not so recent photo-related books that you might or might not know about. And the title of today's Photobook show is Ernst Haas Abstract. Stefan is an artist living in Germany, and he teaches a variety of classes for us here at StrudelmediaLive, from surrealism and gestalt to mentoring classes. Yeah, thanks again for coming today. I'm Anja from StrudelmediaLive, and I want to tell you a little bit about our upcoming photography classes. We just announced our winter courses, and we are currently offering an early bird discount through this Friday, November 22nd, and the discount is 10% on select classes. And the classes that are coming on in the winter, I'm just going to rattle off a few of them. There will be street portraiture, image sequencing, photo mentoring, photographing intimacy, a class on time in photography, one session mini workshops. Our mini workshops are only $39. Handmade photo books. You can learn how to make accordion photo books, for example. A class on architecture and place. We have a mini workshop on Silver Effects Pro. There will be 2 mini workshops on tips and tricks to take better pictures with your iPhone. Then there will be conceptual still life, a class on cyanotype, InDesign for photo books, handcrafting light, and also how to use older photos that you have in your archives to create new work. And Kai McBride will teach his famous Shake Up class. If you want to challenge yourself with all kinds of different photography prompts, this will be an evening course. Evening means here US East Coast evening. And we are welcoming 2 new teachers. One is Olga Ginsberg. She will teach street portraiture. And Chloe Scout-Nix, who will be teaching a class on intimacy in photography. And Stefan, of course, will also teach several classes. One will be a mentoring intensive that starts in January. And we only accept 6 students to this course. He will also teach things on tables, an introduction to the conceptual still life. There are only a few spots left for this class. And I want to also mention that we added several new evening classes because we got requests from people who would like evening classes and also a class on a Saturday. So just a quick reminder, the early bird discount ends or runs through this Friday. Check out our website for the new classes. If you want to ask questions during this talk, simply unmute and ask or wait until the end, or you can also put your questions into the chat. The talk will be about an hour to 75 minutes long. And as always, I want to thank Stefan for yet another episode of his Photobook show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Anja, for your nice introduction, and thank you all for being here. I'm excited to see all of you here. Some familiar, some new faces. So welcome to today's episode. Today's episode will be exciting because I'm having some technical difficulties. So when I just appear for no apparent reason, that could be because I'm having some technical difficulties. But let's hope we get through this without any hiccups. Yeah, today we will look at the idea of abstract photography. Let me share my screen with you and let me reiterate what Anja said. If you have any questions, if you want to jump in, if you want to start a discussion, do it right away. Because this is why we're doing this live. Would be nice if we just have some kind of casual conversation about the topics here. Yeah, so for those of you who have not been here, so the way it works is always I try to give you a quick introduction into the topic, and then we look at the actual photo books. Today we'll be looking at work from Ernst Haas. Austrian photographer, fellow of Anja actually, comes from Vienna. Aaron Siskind, he was a photographer from New York, and Daido Moriyama, a photographer from Japan. So very different places, very different backgrounds, and always the same idea to always see the same question: what is an abstract photograph? And you can approach this kind of there are several ways to approach this question. What is actually abstract photography? One would be to look at some photographers who do that. So an interesting case for that is Laszlo Homolinac. He was working at the Bauhaus. So he is an interesting case because he was doing both. He was working both as a painter in abstract, did these wonderful abstract paintings that have deal with form, shape, color, divisions of the plane, how to organize a frame. But he was also working as a photographer. So he made these kinds of photographs, and he had always had this, he was very famous for doing this kind of elevated vantage point that gives you a weird way of looking at the street and emphasizing these compositional elements. And here you could ask the question, is it an abstract photograph? It is not abstract in the way that it depicts, of course, an actual scene that you can look at and that actually happened in the way that that we see it now in the photograph. But it also has features that deal with composition. So, and this is how Laszlo Moholy-Nagy worked all the time. So he did these kinds of weird titles for his composition that are about, again, about shape and about organization. And then he does this where he has a very concrete title to his photograph, A View from the Radio Tower Berlin. But weirdly enough, this is not, this has obviously nothing to do with the Radio Tower Berlin. He just uses the radio tower to elevate him to a point that the very concrete things like this place, these structures, these walkways, they appear in a way that forms an abstract composition. So one way to look at abstract photography is to look at examples for that. Another way that I tried was, look at the Wikipedia entries. How does Wikipedia define that? And Wikipedia defines it like this: abstract art uses visual language of shape, form, color, and line to create a composition which may exist with a degree of independence from visual references in the world. Interesting. So the interesting part here is with a degree of independence. This obviously has a degree of independence from the visual world in that it does not refer to it, but it uses, of course, it uses elements of our seeing, of our visual perception to form, but it focuses on the impression that these shapes make when they come together. So keep in mind this degree of independence. Of course, a painting is very much different from a photograph. A photograph, how can a photograph achieve a degree of independence from visual references? It, of course, needs a visual reference to exist. So you cannot make a picture of nothing. You always need something in the world to photograph, which is different from a painter who can just think of things. Let's try another angle here. Let's say it is not representational, and let's come back to this idea of this one here. It is not representational in the way that if the Berlin radio tower would cease to exist somehow, this would not help us in any shape, way, or form to get an idea of how the radio tower actually looked like. Because first of all, although it is apparent in the title, it is not depicting the radio tower. This is very different, this kind of photography, from something like the Bechers did. So the Bechers they were photographing these water towers, and they were photographing these water towers in a very straightforward representational way. It was very important for everybody to see, yeah, this is actually how the water tower looked like. And it had this curatorial idea behind this. These water towers in Germany and in Europe, where they started photographing, these were vanishing elements, so vanishing elements of industry culture. So this is pretty much a document where it was important to be able to use the image to get a representation of these water towers and get an idea how these structures actually looked like. But of course, even these representational images, they contain these ideas of composition, of shape, of form, of lighting. So this is pretty much relevant here too. So a photograph is always between this and this. It always operates in this degree of freedom from the visual world. Let's try another angle. Let's try this angle. So this is Edouard Manet's Olympia from 1863. This is very often, this is taken as one of the pictures that were at the beginning of modernist painting. So what is modernist painting? This picture caused quite a scandal when it came out. So one of the scandal was that it depicted a courtesan, what we probably would call today a sex worker, which was a scandal in and by itself. And this in turn caused a lot of criticism of Manet. So he was accused of being a bad painter. And the bad painting was that he failed to use the means of representation. So the body is not shaped in a way that can be properly represented. Everything is flattened out. If you look at the background, it is not even worked out how the background is formed. We do not actually see the room in which this happens. So a lot of in this picture is just forms, shapes that clash against each other. The whole picture has a certain flatness to it. And Clement Greenberg, who put this, the art critic Clement Greenberg, New Yorker art critic, he used this photo to talk about modernism in this way. He said, modernism used art to call attention to art, the limitation that constitute the medium of painting. The flat surface, the shape of the support, the properties of the pigment came to be regarded as positive factors and were acknowledged openly. And this is something that you see here in this picture very openly. So it talks about instead of hiding the fact that this is a painting and a painting needs a canvas and it needs pigment and colors, it needs brushwork. Instead of hiding that, it emphasizes these features of the painting and it highlights this. And this is apart from the content of the picture. This is what caused the scandal here, because it was called bad painting, because it highlights that you are not trying to hide that this is a representational painting. So all of these features that are used in painting to make a representational picture, like paint, a pigment, a canvas, rectangular support, a certain flatness that you need to apply your brush stroke to it, an organization of the frame. Where do I put the things that I depict? This gesture, a certain gesture of painting. All this is, of course, used in representational painting. And the interesting part here where Greenberg sees this shift here is, yeah, let's take the representational part away from this and focus on paint, pigment, canvas, support, flatness, organization of the frame, gesture, and remove all this requirement to actually represent something. And this brought him to championing abstract impressionism. So he was one of the first critics that highlighted the work of the abstract impressionists like Franz Klein, Rauschenberg, and Pollock and Lee Krasner. So, and now suddenly we're looking at pictures like this. This is Mahoning from Franz Klein from 1956. And this does not represent anything anymore. It focuses on gesture, it focuses on painting, it focuses on blocking the view. A lot of the features of painting, unfortunately, vanish in these kinds of reproductions because this canvas, the rough structure of the canvas, the fine textures of his brushwork, all of this usually gets vanishes in these kinds of reproductions. For this, you actually have to stand in front of the painting and look at that. And these are the pictures he did. So he was focusing mostly on these colors, on these ochre colors, on white, on black, and on the strong brush stroke which he used. And one other thing that is vanishing in these kinds of representations, which is usually quite fatal for these images, is that we lose their size. In these kinds of representations on a screen or on the internet, you lose the idea that a painting actually has a size that cannot just be reduced. And this is why I included this picture of Franz Klein in his studio, because here you see the massive canvases he was working. And we were talking about this degree of freedom from representation. The interesting thing about Franz Klein is there is a root for his painting. He comes from Pennsylvania, and he comes from Pennsylvania coal country. And this is how it probably still looked when he was growing up there. And this is how it looks today. These are pictures from the photographer Michael Froyo. He was there a short while ago, just this year. He has been there and made these dispatches from coal country. Wonderful, wonderful project where you have this very strong pictures of this anthracite coal mines where the coal was just dug out of the earth, and you only had to scrap some of the earth away here. And of course, if you look at this photo, there is a degree of freedom in his pictures, but you see where the black comes from, where the strokes come from. They come from here, they come from his childhood, they come from his upbringing. And this is how it looks still today. The whole area is characterized by this, has been changed by these coal minings. And of course, his upbringing has changed how Franz Klein looks at his work and how he looks at the canvas. So although it does not depict something immediately, it made an impression on him, and he impregnated this impression onto the canvas. So Mahoning, this is the title. This is a town near Wilkes-Barre in the Pennsylvania coal country of his childhood. So this is where a lot of his pictures and his pictorial world comes from. Other painters of the abstract impressionism had other influences, like Rauschenberg. He was living in New York and he was looking at billboards. So his immediate idea was take these things that you see on billboard, that you see in newspapers, and take them for their pictorial value and take them for things like rhythm, like organizing a frame. And although this is the underlying pictures are still representational, the way he assembles it is not anymore. It is more about rhythm, about shapes, how he uses it. And he emphasizes this with his brush strokes on the canvas. I will not show Pollock because Pollock has been overshown. So let's focus on Lee Krasner, his wife. Of course, everybody was influencing in the abstract impressionism, was influencing everybody else. So this is Lee Krasner, she did her kind of gesture paintings with felt pen, pastel, and acrylic on paper. And a lot of these images are, this is a canvas. And if you have ever seen a Pollock painting in a gallery, it has a three-dimensional quality to it. And this is what these pictures are about. Focus on, this is a canvas. This is how the paint is applied to the canvas. This is the presence of the painting. And it doesn't depict anything. It just shows you art for art's own sake. And this is Lee Krasner in her studio. And I totally love this photo because it shows what this kind of pictures also do. They are a testament to the artist's work. They are a testament to their gestures on the painting, on the canvas. So if they represent anything, they represent their the act of painting itself. And Lee Krasner herself said to a canvas, I like a canvas to breathe and be alive. Be alive is the point. And this is an important shift. It is not depicting something who is alive, not making a portrait of something of being alive. It is making the canvas itself come to life. Of course, this is nothing that started in the abstract impressionism. This is a detail from Van Gogh's Starry Night, and there you see him. You see him actually applying the paint to it. You see his ecstasy in this moment, in his hands and the way he applied the painting to the canvas. So, and this is how it usually gets depicted. And here a lot of these expressions get lost. A lot of his presence get lost. And you can ask, yeah, this is still a representational painting. But of course, Van Gogh has an amazing degree of freedom in depicting it. Greenberg said the dissolution of the pictorial into sheer texture, into apparently sheer sensation, into an accumulation of repetition seems to speak for and answer something profound in contemporary sensibility. There was the 50s, the late 50s and the beginning of the 60s. This was pretty much the feeling of how painting should be at that time. It had an acute sensibility, acute contemporarily to it. His whole idea was not look through the image, not look through the image at something that is depicted, but look at the image, look directly at the image and look what the image does, how does it come to life? And this brings us to the work of Ernst Haas. I'm just mentioning these abstract impressionists because Ernst Haas and also Aaron Siskind, who we will be looking at, they were part of this scene. They were everybody knew everybody else. So Ernst Haas was working together with Rauschenberg, and Aaron Siskind was a close friend of Franz Klein, who we just saw. So this influences how photography influenced, for example, Rauschenberg, how the paint strokes of Franz Klein influenced Ernst Haas and Aaron Siskind. This is what we will be looking at today. Haas was born in 1921 in Vienna. He moved to New York in the 50s and died there in 86. And the first project that he did was very much in the documentary, followed the documentary ideas of journalism at that time. That was a project on the returning prisoners that came back to Vienna. And he made this very moving, very direct and very straightforward portraits of people that were waiting for their wives, their brothers, their husbands to come back from the war. And this brought him into these pictures and these depictions of this scenes brought him the attention of Cartier-Bresson and Kappa. So he soon became a member of Magnum, which he stayed for all his life. And let me move this out of here. He started out with this very strongly representational one-liner pictures. This is one of the most heart-wrenching images of the afterwar period. There is a soldier coming back, but there is also a mother who holds up a picture of her son who is still imprisoned, and she's waiting for him. So he was very much in this idea of making representational journalistic photos that were about a situation, about showing how people exist in a certain period of time. He moved to New York in 1951 and started his work as a commercial photographer. He worked pretty much everything. He worked in journalism. He worked with the movies. Like this shot, this is a shot of Marilyn Monroe on the set of Misfits. He was a still photographer for these large movie productions. So he photographed pretty much everyone, like Marilyn Monroe. This is Gregory Peck on The White Whale, on Moby Dick, of course. And this wonderful picture from Yul Brynner on the set of The King and I. When he started out his career, that was in the early 50s. That was the dominant style to photograph. So due to technical reasons, pretty much everybody at that time, when they were doing journalistic photography, they were shooting in black and white. That was also the time when the first usable color photographs, color films came out. This is, of course, the legendary Kodachrome. This came out in the 50s. And after it came out, Haas picked it up very quickly for his work. He continued his work on the set. This is a picture of Gene Kelly. And to understand his aesthetics, where he comes from this movie background. And the movie background at that time was dominated by a different way, a very different way to handle color than we are used to right now. So this is Pressburger Power, The Red Shoes, one of the most beautiful pictures of all time, one of the most beautiful color pictures of all time. It is, of course, about these red shoes, so it makes a lot of sense to make this to turn this into a color movie. So this is a sight to behold, and the aesthetics that you see in these movies at the time, especially in how to deal with color palette. Pretty much every photographer who turned to color photography was influenced by these kinds of movies. It was here, The Red Shoes. Here is Tales of Hoffman from 51. But of course, also from Vertigo. In the introduction to Ernst Haas abstract, where David Campany, who wrote the essay that goes with the book, he wrote that if the history of color photography would include movies, the story would be completely different. So we are so used to starting the history of color photography somewhere in the 70s, probably with Eggleston, with his first major exhibition in the MoMA. But of course, in the movies, color photography and the way to handle color in pictures was already very well established, and people were influenced by this. But they were influenced in a very different way. Haas did all kinds of stuff like fashion photography, like this shoot in Egypt, like this work for Vogue, which I think is marvelous and which can only be done in Kodachrome. he and a lot of the photographers that picked up color photography, they suffered a little bit from the technical means of reproduction. That is something that was not so easy to do. So it was used in advertising a lot with a very expensive means diode transfer print that was super expensive and produced this these strong colors. But that was not available to everyone. Usually, Kodachrome was a color reversal film, so it was meant to be projected. It was not meant to be printed. So it was this way that you see right here. This was the way the film was used. So it took everybody a while to get their heads around how can I actually print that. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of the color photographers of that time just now appear in book form, because now we approached a place where we actually have the technical means to print these kinds of film. Of course, the only real way to look at Haas and his Kodachromes is to project them. And this is one of the origins of abstract. Abstract was not, his book was not, has not started as was not meant to be a book. It was meant to be a slideshow. It was meant to be consumed like this. Of course, this changed in the 70s and 80s, and Kodachrome was used by more photographers, and it produced some of the iconic photographs of the 70s and 80s, like, of course, Stephen McCurry was also the guy who shot the last roll of Kodachrome in 2010. And he made these kinds of iconic shots of the Afghan girl in 1986. It had rather long, the film itself had a rather long life, but it expired it stopped being produced in 2010. When, let me get some more light in here. It stopped being produced in 2010 because the way to develop this these kinds of film was too complicated and too expensive. So Kodak stopped producing it eventually. So let's come back to this question because I now realize that I haven't really answered the question. What is abstract photography? Let's try again a different answer, and let's see that it is basically about the joy of seeing. So not looking at something special, but just seeing itself. So before we look at abstract, let's look at something else. Let's look at New York in color. As I already said, Ernst Haas was tireless. He tirelessly roamed the streets of New York. And so before turning to abstract photography, he was turning just to street photography. And this is a beautiful book that came out a couple of years ago that collected these early color photos of him. And here he is pretty much all over the place, which I totally love from him. So he also has this, apart from this abstract way of looking at the world, he has this very concrete way, and it's very humanistic way of looking at the world. I totally love the picture. The picture on the left talks a lot about New York. The picture on the right is just this wonderful moment of intimacy when this couple is going window shopping here. So this book collects work from, as he says, from 52 to 62, so 10 years of working on the streets of New York. And it already has this wonderful colors that Kodachrome does. And Prestel really did an excellent job at reproducing these colors. This is just a wonderful book to look at it, just the joy of looking at it. But his abstract way of looking at photography is already starting here. So this is not done by himself, so it was not assembled by himself, but I think it was assembled by his son and another picture editor. So, and they did a wonderful job of making these kind of wonderful pairings that you see here with this circular figure on the right and the circular figure on the left, and the one on the right, just mirroring each other. So, and the many ways these pictures echo each other, like this yellow here and this yellow there. This is color photography from a time when color photography was not in fashion. It could not be shown in books. It could not be shown in museums because it could not probably be printed, but it obviously existed. And for me, that was kind of a discovery. I think we had discovered Sauleiter a couple of years ago. I did not know that Ernst Haas had been doing that in this way. Of course, he did this very fine, this is excellent compositions here. But here it already started, and into going into something that allows himself a different degree of freedom from the pictures, from what he represents here. And this is just, I would just flip through this. It's just a joy to look at, and it's a shame for people like not only him but also Sauleiter, who wasn't able to show his work while he did it, but also to Gordon Parks, who has been photographing in the South and has been doing great color photography. But it's just great that this comes out now and we get this wonderful representations of these books now. And you get all these kinds of moody shots, and you see the leeway that this film still had. And if you have ever used slide film, you will probably know how hard this is to pull off, because they don't give you a lot to work with, so you have to be very precise in how you do this. So I love this shot, which brings us back to the idea of representational. Here you find this wedge here that is in a picture, but you also find this wedge here, and great job by this editing team to sift through all of Haas pictures and find these combinations in here. And this here is just breathtaking to me. And he's pulling out all the strips, tricks like this motion blur here. And this gives you another idea of what abstract photography means. It means connecting things that are not connected in any way, just by their shape and form and color. So I did not want to show you this one because this is not abstract. This is representational. It has this humanistic touch to it that you see all over the place here. It is just a brilliant street photography book on New York before street photography in New York was actually a thing. So, but the book we actually want to talk about is this one. I already mentioned this. This book originates from a slideshow Haas did. This was the way he meant his photography, these abstract photos, to be consumed. It was to be consumed as a slideshow, shown in a museum context, projected. He sometimes used single slides, but he also used two slides together, slightly overlapping. So he was very experimental with this one. And it's interesting when we look at pictures like this to know that he's also been working in advertising. So some of his abstraction, like these cans that he's been photographing, it's somehow the opposite of advertising. It is what happens with products after we bought them and threw them away. So he has a lot of these kind of shots that are just things that you find on the street. it's also an interesting way to look at New York in this way, not look at the houses, but look just what is directly beneath you. And these sequences, it's fantastic to look at this book for his sequencing, because he did the sequencing himself. He made these kind of funny little games, these anthropomorphic figures here sometimes that, of course, depict onto another way of looking at abstract work. It is representational, but it does not represent what we saw in it. So obviously we see a face in this oil spill. He was fascinated by these traces, by these leftovers. A city like New York, you have an enormous number of people crisscrossing the city, walking the streets and leaving their footprints there, and leaving the footprints on the sidewalk, on the streets. And all these traces come together in the city and form a sort of collective abstract impressionism, because everybody leaves his mark here on the canvas and brings it to life. He is very drawn to this strong geometrical form that are about shape, about texture. But he's also about these color blocks, these color fields that clash against each other. But he's also at times about this organic structures that he's fascinated with. And he's got a whole bunch of these, how he navigates through this. And this is a different sort of texture, different from the strong color fields, different way to organize the frame, different ways to occupy the frame with these organic structures. And this is just, as I said, to me, it is about this joy of seeing. Sometimes I try to find out what it is. Sometimes I just don't care, because it just looks good. It is just the joy, this joy of seeing what we look at. It's just good photography. And I don't ask the question what it shows. So in this way, the degree of freedom comes from the viewer to decide, oh, I'm not interested in what it is. I'm just interested in how it appears in the frame. Sometimes we see faces formed here. There's a whole sequence of where he plays with this idea of the anthropomorphic that we see in this dysregulated, in this unstructured eyes. You can see an eye here, you can see a nose here, or you can see an eye here, or you can see the lips here. This is something like watching the clouds for these kinds of structures. And I could just go on with this, because this is just a beautiful book. And a lot of this, and you will find a lot of the color patterns and the way to treat color, that this originates in looking at movies and how the movies treat this color palette, how Hitchcock treated it in Vertigo, how Powell and Pressburger treated their colors in The Red Shoes. And this is why I wanted to show you another approach by quickly look at the time here, by a photographer that doesn't really register or doesn't really think in these terms of abstraction or not abstraction. This is Daido Moriyama. For him, photography is being exposed to the street, and this is by a publisher that I didn't know before, Skira. They make obscure art books. Not all of them are good. This is actually good. So this is Daido Moriyama. I knew him for quite some times, but when you know him, you probably know him for his black and white photography. So that he shot also in color, but was not exactly new to me, but I did not know that he also already shot in color in the 60s and in the 70s when he did all his the work that he became famous for. So this is street photography, but this is street photography from another place. This is mostly street photography from Japan, from Tokyo, mostly from Tokyo. Which brings us to another way of abstraction. Sometimes abstraction is just, we have no idea what it means, like not being able to read this kind of, to read these kinds of signs here. So because I cannot read Japanese, this makes turn the picture into a different, gives me a different degree of freedom to interpret it. So strangeness is one kind of abstraction. I found it interesting to compare him with Haas because Moriyama was also into the idea of was also shooting very filmic. So he was in these kinds of film sets where he photographed a lot. In contrast to Haas, Moriyama has never been a commercial photographer. So he made some commercial work, and he made he sold some of his pictures, but he was not a commissioned photographer. So he never worked as a photojournalist or never worked into fashion photography or advertisement. So his work comes from this place of roaming the streets of Tokyo and roaming, especially here, the red light districts of Tokyo. And
Stefan, sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
Can you move the book over just a little bit so there's less glare on the upper right, like to the in that direction?
I have to work on my lighting setup.
Oh, okay, that's better. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, I get this out. So it's different photography. It's a different era. It's also a different way to treat color. The colors are much more muted in his photography because he was using a different film stock. And this is why he ends up with these kinds of color aberrations here. And this removes the picture from what it actually shows and resolves it into some kind of abstract pattern here. And the color photography here, that we do not actually see the proper white balance on this turns it into another eerie scene and removes it from, gives us, again, another degree of freedom from depicting the world. Sometimes his abstraction comes from these kinds of juxtapositions, where he juxtaposes totally weird, random photographs with pictures he shot while traveling. Sometimes it comes from a way to photograph, although I thought this was a way that was, these are two pictures. This is actually one picture. And he photographed a structure here in the middle that makes this strange divide. And this turned this from an ordinary picture that is just a scene in a mall into something very different, into something that is an instantaneous ready-made that brings two different aspects together. This is probably a photo that you know. Well, at least I knew it, but I only knew it in black and white. So you can go through this book and look at a lot of the images, and some of the images would have later been converted into black and white to fit in better with the rest of his pictures. So pretty famous picture of him, but I did not know that it started out as black and white. He shared Haas' interest for wetness, for wet streets, and for this debris on the streets here. But sometimes he has this very straight way of looking into the world, which is closer to Ernst Haas' work in New York, where this is clearly not abstraction. This is very real. It is death and it is sex. So he is working on a very existential level here. So this is what is fascinating about Moriyama, because he moves all the time between these different registers of abstraction and suddenly being very real. I enjoyed these one because they are from Germany. So he actually photographed on his all the time on his travels. So this is from St. Pauli in Germany. So this is an interesting book to hold this against the Ernst Haas work, because it has a different aesthetic, but it also has a similar way to abstract from the real world in a way. So I don't know how Skira managed to slip this one out, but they somehow managed. So this is a great book on Daido Moriyama in color. So, and with this as a contrast, let me come quickly to the last ones. So this is the New Yorker photographer Aaron Siskind. He was part of this abstract expressionism scene. So he was a good friend with Franz Klein, who we just looked at with his work on Mahoning. And he was working with the pictures of the expressionists in the back of his head, and he wanted to apply this to his photography. So this is the way that he looked into the world, pretty much like this. He started out from this place, from a very straightforward place of looking at structures on the beach. But he very quickly moved on to actually intervening into the picture. So here, this structure that you see here, this everybody assumed that this is something that he just made up. But he was interested in these kinds of black and white depictions. He was interested in these structures. And this brings us back to Lee Krasner, the idea that you make a mark, someone makes a mark. In this case, the mark is not made by the artist himself, but he just records the marks that other people left on these walls, not with the intention to make a painting, but just was with the intention to leave some kind of mark there. And he was fascinated by this. So he focused on these kinds of structures here. He went on to photograph. This is where the title comes from, the fragmentation of language. So this is one of his interests, how language that we see on walls, on billboards, how it starts to break down, how entropy eventually erodes these kinds of messages and turn it into some kind of gibberish. But here, he actually calls it homage to Franz Klein. So he made a whole sequence on these kind of black and white marks on billboards. And the interesting thing here about this is the captions. So although we don't care too much about where this is, he still said, okay, this was in Lima and this was taken in Jalapa. So that is a way to still bind the picture to something in the real world. So now we know, okay, it is happen in the real world. This is not artwork. This is something that just happened to be somewhere in the world. And this brings us back to what photography, abstract photography is. And abstract photography cannot go all the way. It cannot go the way to make a picture of nothing. It always has to make a picture of something. But it can be deliberate in how we see this, how we interpret it, how it can give the viewer a degree of freedom on how to experience how the world is. If you find books like this, just buy them. So Siskind is amazing. I love him dearly, but there is not a lot of pictures, not a lot of books out there. And like with all these kinds of pictures that you see from him on the internet, you have to see the actual prints here to appreciate the textures in here, because it is all about how the picture feels. And this is what brings me to my last book, which is a really tiny little one. I do not know. This is from Phaidon. They have this tiny picture books. They sometimes do on more or less famous photographers, and this is one on Ernst Siskind, which I find interesting because it includes his early work. He started out as pretty much like Ernst Haas before he got into abstract photography, as a documentary photographer in Harlem, where he lived. So he made these kinds of shots that pretty much are not abstract at all. They are very rooted in the real world surrounding him. And I especially love this shot. This is just a beautiful shot of a dancing scene in Harlem around 1935. But you see in this book how his way of looking at the world soon develops into something that is more focused on the detail and it's more focused on these abstract structures. And I want to end up on this here, because he did a wonderful series on that is called, I have to look this up again. It is The Pleasures and Terrors of Levitation. So he made this project in a swimming pool, in a pool also in Harlem in the 40s. He photographed people jumping from the boards at that time. And for me, this is one of another way to approach abstract photography. Walter Benjamin famously said in his work on Little History of Photography, he famously introduced the idea of the optical unconscious, that the camera sees things that we don't see, that we as humans do not see. This is interesting to look at these images in this regard. Benjamin was referring to Edward Muybridge and his experiments on moving photography, where he was photographing in a film-like strip people walking. And this discovered aspects of our movement, aspects that we do not see immediately. And Siskind did a similar thing here. So he discovered something in these expressions of joy when you are in a swimming pool and you make a jumper from the 5-meter board. He picked out this tiny moment where you are floating, and this is something, even if you try to reconstruct the context for this image, the afternoon at the pool, the sound of laughter, the smells of chlorine and fried food and suntan lotion, the people running around, the screaming and the laughter. Even if you reconstruct all this, you do not see a picture like this. You do not can immediately attach this picture back to the scene, because this picture brings out something else that is not present and is not available to us as human. It is available to the camera. And this is one of the initial joys of photographing, that you hand over yourself. You trust the camera, the apparatus of the camera, to capture these kinds of moments here. And this brings us to this last aspect of abstraction in photography. It has a degree of freedom that refers not to our world, but also to the world of the camera. And that is something that we don't know, that we cannot experience. That is something that just this apparatus, the shutter, the chemicals, or the sensor, that only this machine can experience. But this is a way to look at the world that we actually don't know. And this is the last aspect of abstraction in photography. And this is what I want to end with the pleasures and terrors of levitation. And with that, we're almost on time.
Say,
Right.
Stefan,
Yeah.
we had a question wondering if Haas cropped his abstract images a good bit, or if he framed them in camera, if you know.
I'm not sure. I would assume he framed them already very good in camera, because Kodachrome was 35mm film. So if you crop into that, it doesn't give you a lot of leeway to work with. There may be some cropping inside there, but I'm not sure. So the article, so there is a brilliant article. I don't know, I have to eventually have to stop looking at work from David Campany, but the curation here and the re-edition was done by David Campany. So he also wrote the essay in here. And in the essay, he does not talk, which comes at the end here, he does not talk about whether they are cropped or not. But
since he created slides, I mean, since he created them for slideshows, I would think that he did not crop them after because he needed the slides for the slideshows. So
yeah, right. And they would not probably not fit unless you enlarge them, and they are color reversal film. You cannot actually do a lot with color reversal film, at least at that time. So you cannot enlarge it, cannot process it, cannot print it properly. So it was beautiful, but yeah, looked fantastic on these kinds of projections.
do you know more about his slideshows, how he presented them? Was it one projector, or was it several projectors? Was it in a gallery, or was it at an event or a live event? Do you know?
Campany mentions this briefly. He mentions that he had a complicated setup of 2 projectors, and where he was using one projector always to overlay the other one and fading the other one out. So there was some kind of choreography to it. And he does not really mention where he actually showed them, but I would assume that he showed them in this way in a gallery. So in the back room of a gallery, probably, because you have to dim the lights. And what he mentions is that the slideshow had a soundtrack. So that was very important to Ernst Haas, that he picked a piece by Gregor Ligeti that he always played in the background when he showed the slideshow. And both things, so that is the interesting part of this, both things. So of course, you can look at the Gregor Ligeti piece, but you also find a link to the actual slideshow on the internet. So Presto made that available, and it has a download link here somewhere. So you can actually look.
Okay, that's great to know.
Nice plus to it. But I have to say, I actually liked this, but maybe that's just me. I like the printed version of this a lot more, because it gives you time to yeah, you control your pace. And of course, with a slideshow, you don't control your pace. You are just subjected to however the slideshow runs.
Subjected to his sequence, which I think is also kind of interesting.
Right. It's
You
just a
have to
different
watch
way,
the sequence
different
he
way of
had in
experience.
mind.
Yeah.
Right.
Stefan, may I ask a question?
Sure. Shoot.
Do those pictures remind me in far to surrealistic pictures, or am I wrong?
Yeah. I think in so far as the surrealists had the same way of exposing, of opening yourself up to whatever happens in the city. So this kind of juxtapositions that you cannot control what is thrown at you in the city, and you have everything everywhere at the same time coming at you. Billboards, people on the streets, stuff that is thrown down, advertisements, everything happens at the same time. That is a very surrealistic way of looking at the city, because it creates all these kinds of juxtapositions, like this gentleman here who looks sad somehow, and here suddenly you bring him together with this statue. So yeah, I think that is his experience of the city, and he emphasizes it by cutting out certain parts of it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Any more questions? You can just unmute and ask, please. Stefan, that was very inspiring once again. I love that you also showed these other books by other photographers. I think that was such a rich way to look at abstraction, especially Ernst Siskind.
Yeah.
That was really
Yeah.
wonderful.
I can't recommend Siskind highly enough. So it's really, I'm still trying to get some decent books of him, but there is not a lot of him out there. So this is nice, but it's just way too small.
I was able to purchase the Ernst Siskind at 100.
Okay.
At $100. I had to
Okay. Yeah.
found it in a very small shop. They had taken a day to dig it out because they knew they had it, but they didn't know where it was. So I was really happy to pay even $100. It was very special. It has some of the images that you showed in that other book.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great, Grace. You found that.
Yeah.
Great.
Nice.
Yeah, there are some out there, but I've seen some in used bookstores in the US, and they're very expensive, and they get even more expensive if you ship them to Germany. So
yeah,
I have to come over and rob some.
you can look at my copy.
Yeah.
Come over, Stefan, we go photobook shopping together.
Oh yeah, let's do that. Sounds great.
All right. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
And I'm not sure when the next photobook show is, if we will do one in December or if the next one is in January. So we have to still figure that out, but we will let you know. And if you have any questions about classes, you can always reach out to me directly. Feel free to do that. Stefan, thank you so much. This was great. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here.
Bye. Thank you.